occupied Kashmir, Machanization and its impacts. You all know, as you have been the main source of guiding the people of Kashmir, and you have seen what has happened in Indian-occupied Kashmir since last 3 decades, especially from August 5th, 2019, the way India abrogated Article 370 and 35A, then started a settler colonialism in Kashmir by changing the domicile law, giving the domicile certificates to the non-state subjects. And we all know this was not a sudden move on behalf of Government of India. As you know that people in RSS, they were always against the Article 370 or 35A, and they wanted to do away with it. We know about the Shama Prasad Mukherjee, who was the founder of Jan Sangh and now called Bharatiya Janata Party. And in 2014, BJP inducted this manifesto, the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, and gradually they started their way. Even in 2014, or even before, the Indian governments also wanted to do it, but would not do. But on 2019, what happened, this is all now documented everywhere, each and of us know. But the things which are on fast track, the government of India is doing is, on one hand, we always discuss about the domicile law, but the way they have now changed the administrative structure in Kashmir, and also trying to carve new political parties in Kashmir in order to search for new collaborators in order to cement their occupation and annexation of Indian-occupied Kashmir. And the list goes long. They have, till date, we know it's on record by the Indian Deputy Home Minister in the Indian Parliament that till December, they have issued 3.2 million domicile certificates to non-state subjects in Kashmir. Likewise, already 4.3 lakh canals of land was under the Indian military, but now Indian military does not need any of the NOCs from any of the department. They can define any area as strategic and construct the cantonments and the societies for their soldiers. And along with that, we have seen that they are trying to now delimitation of the state assembly, so-called state assembly, and in order to decrease the number of Muslims in that parliament also, which is, that parliament has always served the Indian purposes, but still that was a Muslim majority parliament, but now they are trying to change that structure also. So this has had a very huge impact on the society in Indian-occupied Kashmir, the people of Indian-occupied Kashmir, how they have lived. We have been joined by a very learned panel. We have been joined. I'm very thankful to Ambassador Tamina Jinjua. She was traveling from Japan to Geneva, but I'm very thankful to her. She made it to this. Senator Lee from Australia, she joined us. Very welcome to Senator Dr. Mubin Shah, a well-known name in the Kashmir. He has been the former chairman of Chamber of Commerce in Kashmir and rights activist. He was incarcerated soon after the abrogation of Article 370. It was only because of the international pressure he was released. Now he's living in Malaysia in exile. So we have been joined by Dr. Saif Malik, is the director, Institute of Director India Studies Center at the Institute of Strategical Studies, Islamabad. We have been joined by Shani Ahmed, international strategist, very good friend of ours, and Nida Salam, Barrister Nida Salam, a young and energetic Kashmiri voice. Dr. Vikas Ali Kausar is also a Kashmir expert and also head of department in the governance in National University of Modern Language, Islamabad. Mr. Qureshi, a well-known name, a Kashmiri lobbyist, a journalist, and Kashmir expert, as well as his expertise on the Arab world, is very well known. Claire Bilville, she's from United States, United Kingdom, from Scotland, a very energetic voice of people of Kashmir, trying to further unity among the Kashmiris and running the campaigns for the Kashmiris in the United Kingdom. Dr. Professor Shugufta Ashraf, she coordinated this. She's a team member of this Kashmir Institute of International Relations and World Muslim Congress, and she has always been very helpful in organizing these seminars. To start with, I will straight away go to Dr. Mubin Shah Sahab, as we will listen from a Kashmiri who has suffered himself, his business. He can go around how the business community has suffered in Kashmir and overall human rights situations in Kashmir, as well as the Indian policy, the Hindutva policy in Kashmir. Dr. Mubin Shah, recently Government of India has also filed an FIR against Dr. Mubin Shah for his activism on Kashmir. Dr. Mubin Shah Sahab, you have the floor.
Thank you, Altaf Sahab. It is great to be on this panel and discuss about Kashmir, and particularly the subject is very, very important, because this is what is going to happen. Kashmir, it is already happening, and it will finally be there in the colonization of the Indian occupied Kashmir as such. We as businessmen, came to realize this. We unfortunately did not realize it at that point of time, 2008, when we got involved completely in the movement of Amarnath Yatra. And when we read today and when we think retrospectively, and we see that, it has been an ongoing process of colonization, which has happened all over the world in history. And when I read about colonization, and it comes to that, the first and foremost is settler colonization. And settler colonization is the most done in the world previously, like, in Australia, Canada, in the United States, in apartheid South Africa, and Israel, and now India is doing it in Kashmir, because they have put in the policy for every aspect, every brick of settler colonialism is now in place in Kashmir by the laws they have enacted. And the first and foremost, after 1947, was exploitation of exploitative colonialism, which is called, and based on the control of resources. And as a businessman, I know that, we, for example, one of the biggest resources of Kashmir was 20,000 megawatts of power we could generate from water resources in Kashmir. First, in 1950, an agreement was done under the Indus Water Treaty, and our waters was given to, for example, to Pakistan, while the Indian waters which were going to Pakistan were retained by India. I remember in 1905, I first met as Senior Vice President of the Kashmir Chamber of Commerce, the then Prime Minister of India, Manmohan Singh. We had a very sort of an hour meeting, our chamber. And there I pointed out that, the greenery, the agriculture development in Punjab has been because of Kashmir, because the water was retained and Bakra Nangal Dam was made. And, and nobody looked towards Kashmir, but what's happening in Kashmir, because our waters were sort of given to Pakistan. Okay, there's not a problem. But the problem is that we could not make dams. And on top of it, up to date, about 3,210 megawatts generation capacity was created in India, in Kashmir. And out of that, about 2,100 is under the government of India corporations like NHPC. And we are a state which would have been surplus in power, and we have to import power during winter and pay the highest money, for getting that. So this was exploitation of the resources. So this is where they first tested it. This is how the colonialism system starts, like that you exploit the resources first, slightly, slowly, and see what is going to happen. And unfortunately, our own politicians who were ruling Kashmir were a party to it. They did such agreements by which NHPC, which was the owner of these corporations, it became one of the biggest and profit-making corporation based on the incomes they had in Kashmir. And what did they share? 13% of the power generated. And the rest they would take away to the rest of India. And that's how they created the money for themselves and then created assets in other states from the money earned from Kashmir. So this is the first exploitation colonialism they did. And now, after August 5th, 2019, they project to the world that, that there is going to be development in Kashmir. And one of the things which they project to the people, to the international community, is that there is about 4,000 megawatts out of this we can give. And to the general public in Kashmir and to the Indian public, they say 35,000 crore rupees investment will come into Kashmir, where not even 1,000 crores or 1,500 crores per year investment will come in. You see, this is what the narrative being created by the Indian government in the world community is for that we did all these changes on August 5th, 2019 for the development of Kashmir. And now, if you go through that MOUs which they have done it with NHPC, the same corporation who have exploited us. And with this thing that after 40 years, they will give this project back. And on what basis? They will be giving 12% every year free power or whatever it is. So this is how the narratives have been built by India. And Mr. Vani talked about the Indian Army. They have about at this point of time 54,000 acres of land illegally occupied. 54,000 acres of land. Unfortunately, let me be very frank and very in 2008 when we were at the forefront of the Amarnath problem at that point in time, and when because of our pressure of the people that time, because it became a people's movement at that time, they revoked that order, wherein the idea behind that Amarnath thing was not for the shrine, it was to create a state within a state. What they are talking today of having this union territory, for example, Kashmir, union territory Ladakh, and they had the plan at that point of time to have a union territory for Kashmiri Pandits, separated within the Kashmir Valley, just like in Palestine. And this is what is going to happen if the world does not stop India. It does not stop India. The world has to stop India. And at that point of time, one of our very prominent leaders, Gilani Saab, did try to stress on us, particularly the business community and others, that you fight for, now after winning this Amarnath thing, of revoking this order, you fight for this return of this acres, so many lakhs of acres of land are with the Indian army illegally. A very, very small example. I don't know, because people who may have gone to Kashmir, there's a very, in the town itself, in the city itself, there's a very important area called Batmalu. and where the main bus stand is there and all that. It was given to the Indian Army, a portion of it. And then subsequently, when development happened in that area of people and bus stand and other things, and the state government gave them separate land in replacement. The Indian Army took that land also and still retains this land. This is the state of affairs. And I remember the previous chief minister in one of his meetings with the army, just requested them, why do you have taken the land already? They said, no, we'll not give it. Okay, you can make 1/4 of it into a park. This was what was the status of our governments in Kashmir. They could not at that point because they were stooges. They were the people who were getting them elected, so-called elections, which were never there as such. So, and the thing is that after the August 5th, 2009, it has become a complete, India has been given a free hand by the world community. Yes, in my case, as Altaf Saab said, there was pressure in the American Senate and other places because of the fact that because of my relatives who are, a lot of them are in America, and they, went to their MPs and all that, and sort of senators, and created a sort of a pressure. And my son, who is basically an American citizen, also there is pressure, and the Indian government had to then withdraw my case of PSA, withdraw my case. Initially released me for 3 months. And in the Supreme Court did not take my case for months together. 4 months I was incarcerated without any, because the only thing I was asking them was for the rights of Kashmiris. And I had not spoken anything else except this, that naturally. And because we want settlement of Kashmir based on UN Security Council resolutions and based on the right of self-determination. That is the most important thing. And until unless this is not done, I fear what has happened, what we are seeing today in Palestine will happen in Kashmir. It is a complete carbon copy of the Israeli colonial settlement policy they are applying in Kashmir. If we do not realize it, if our friends in Pakistan, in the world, do not recognize it, then I am sorry, we have lost the whole thing, the whole narrative about Kashmir. And this is my request. My idea of attending this was also this too for us. You people are in different places in the world, and we can garner support. At the same time, the narrative about Kashmir has to be corrected. Has to be corrected. It is not only a question of human rights; it's also of a question of wiping out the Kashmiri people from their place. And this is what is settler colonialism, and this is what it is going to happen. And I hope Pakistan is the only country, and some countries like Turkey or Malaysia are supporting us. But I have expectations from the democratic countries, because lately, there have been voices in other countries regarding their mistreatment. For example, in Canada, there have been voices of the mistreating of their indigenous people, and maybe the people will rise up. And because I was yesterday also in a webinar, and I said, until and unless the Kashmiris, particularly non-resident Kashmiris and our friends all over the world, make it a people's movement, because governments have failed us. Tell you very frankly, governments have failed us. All these years, from 1947, they have failed us. While as in cases of, in countries where UN Security Council resolutions were passed, within months they were implemented. In the case of Palestine, unfortunately, and in our case, they have never been implemented. And there has been something or the other, in the 1960s, the Cold War, the rations vetoed any plan of doing some activity, and now I fear if that is why UN Security Council does not even discuss Kashmir. Yeah, at least only they discussed recently because of pressure through Imran Khan's government. On closed door meeting, They did not discuss it openly. It is maybe because of the fact that powers at this point of time in the United States and all are in a way maybe telling them that we will veto everything, just like the Russians would do at that point of time. So this is our unfortunately so correct this whole thing. I don't think there is any other way except to make it a people's movement in every place of the world, particularly in these countries like Britain, where we have a very, very sizable non-resident Kashmiris from the other side of the ceasefire line. And we have, that is the only hope we have. Besides, naturally, Pakistan is staying political, saying that we will give, help in number of respects. And unfortunately, without a war, I don't think Pakistan will be able to do anything for Kashmir until unless the UN Security Council puts a resolution and puts sanctions on India. And the two ways I feel is one, make a people's movement. Second, a BDS movement against India. Because economy is going to, being a businessman myself, I know the businessmen in India will be the first one to go against his government if their business gets affected by any sanctions anywhere in the world. This is my belief and this is my thinking. And this is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mubin Shah. I rightly pointed out, unless we make it a people's moment in different capitals of the world, the things might not change. We have the friends in different countries who are trying to make it a people's moment. And I know Claire Bird has started a campaign on 5th August, Red for Kashmir, and we have seen lots of posters and social media campaign in different countries, and different lobbies and different networks are engaged in that, and hopefully that will be helpful in making it a people's movement in different capitals. As till date, if we were discussing, this was Dr. Shah discussed only one thing about the India, how India got hold of the resources of Kashmir, and now we see even the sand is being extracted by the Indians, non-state subjects in Kashmir. No Kashmiri is given that permit also. So from last August 5th till date, India has enacted around 200 laws in Indian occupied Kashmir, which were not previously there. Those central laws are now enacted in Kashmir. This is all about the settler colonialism in Kashmir. I have with me Dr. Brigadier Saif Malik, as he has some other commitment. He was in the university to deliver a lecture. So Dr. Saif, you have the floor. We will hear from you. What is India Studies Center doing for Kashmir? Unmute yourself, sir. Unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. One is a very learned speaker and well-informed audience around the globe. At the outset, let me pay gratitude to KWIR for holding such an important webinar and a topic which is very timely. I think it is the most valid topic of the day. Perhaps I speak on what India Study Center is doing on Kashmir. Let me just have a gist of happenings in Kashmir, the topic which has been given to us today. And especially I would be looking what is happening and what all it has impacts on Kashmir and the Kashmiris and how it could be stopped. Ladies and gentlemen, if we look at the genesis of the issue, then it will be a long time is required. But to me, 5/8 of Kashmir is not less than or different from the 9/11 of Kashmir, because for the first time in the contemporary history, we are witnessing a different sort of terrorism, which is a demographic terrorism we are witnessing in Kashmir, where deliberately attempts are being made not only to suck the resources, as Dr. Mubin has mentioned. Now it is the question on the identity of Kashmir, their political economy, their social, political, and economic aspect all are being compromised as a result of the revoking of Article 70 and 35A. $17 million economy is in shambles now. So we can see that once this majority willfully is being converted into minority, and once India bring this issue to United Nations on the fact that when this resolution was passed, as it has been mentioned, that let the majority right of self-determination, let the UN resolution to be impacted. At that time, what will be the validity of that population who will challenge it? And who will accept it on that? None. So, ladies and gentlemen, so at the moment, identity of Kashmiris, their economy, their political and social stature, all are being compromised as a result of the latest developments in Kashmir. Kashmir was under siege, but not in the recent part. To me, it is under siege ever since the partition took place. But the thing were getting worse and day by day. Once the curfew was imposed, then COVID, then thereafter we can see this imposition of a new domicile law and its impact. So our Honorable Dr. Mubin has mentioned that what the world should do and what Pakistan should do. Now, I think, let me play my part now. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the only Pakistan which is taking up the issue at the right fora, at the right moment. For instance, in the recent past, in the two subsequent events in UNSC, our Prime Minister, the way he spoken, and we will continue. This is not an act of something favor. It is our, we believe that every Pakistan, it is a moral, religious obligation for us to stay with our brethren in Kashmir, and Pakistan is using all possible fora for that. Now coming to that India Study Center, which is focused on research on India, and Kashmir is the foremost and the important segment for this very purpose. So we keep on engaging the intelligentsia, people from all walks of life and from different background, and we do debate on various issues on Kashmir. We prepare the policy input for policy making. We should prepare the input for the researchers, and we not only do this, but rather we make it public through all possible formats, such like events which we are having in the 1 year past. I request our well-informed audience, please do visit the website of issi.org.pk. You come to know that what all events have taken place, and we have taken care of all segment of Kashmir, the way these have been undermined. And coming to some other aspects of Kashmir, I think it has been rightly mentioned by Dr. Mubin. It is not social mobility, social movement, and this movement has to be across the globe. It should not be in isolation. Rather, one should develop, get the synergy from each other. It is not only the Kashmiri diaspora around the globe, rather every Pakistani, every Muslim around the globe must join the hands with the Kashmiris for the right cause, and especially the people and the institution and the country which really matter to the helm of affair. Uh, there, I think this responsibility become very manifold. So Pakistan is sensitizing the world that this Kashmir is not an issue of just human rights, as already mentioned. It is a very sensitive issue, especially two armed nuclear states, and one issue which is really haunting the peace and stability in South Asia. It is the Kashmir unresolved issue. Any miscalculation. We are Pakistanis, and especially the government of Pakistan, are sensitizing the world. They must pay attention. It's the early resolution, because any miscalculation would not only set a fire to the region, rather the whole world would be the victim of this miscalculation. So this is the right time that the people, that the voices of conscience should come up, not only from within the India, but from all across the world, that they should come up. And especially the Modi, which is the tactics and the strategy which is being followed by Modi, as already highlighted. He's writing a new chapter on the parallel footing and the Palestine and the Israel. God forbid, the same thing happens and the world doesn't stop, then that may lead to jeopardize and compromise the peace and stability, not only in the region, but the world as well. So, so genocide of Muslims, of Kashmir, and, and depriving their economy, it may lead to further disaster, and it has its own impact fallout, or this is a very serious. So we call upon the all voices of conscience from the world and the institutions which really claim to bring peace in the world and to resolve the issue. They must see this issue from the prism of justice and in the prism from the UN resolution, which demand the peaceful settlement, and the only passage is that is the plebiscite and the right of self-determination. War, ladies and gentlemen, is the not an option for the solution. If this is an option, it has another disastrous impact which has been multiplied. It is the last option at the last resort. Once you try everything else. So this is the right time, because after 5/8 to meet, that is the 9/11, now the voices are coming out from all important segment of societies from the world. So I call upon the civilized world to play their role, exert pressure on India, exert pressure on BJP, and to stop them their present methodologies and tactics for placing the issue in the back burner in the garb of this revoking of Article 370 and 35A. With this, I must stop. I wish to listen more from others, but since I have another commitment, certainly we will benefit from the post-event report, and we will multiply it at various places. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Saif. One thing which I would like to say that it's not only what India is doing on settler colonialism in a way that they are giving the state subject to non-state subjects. They have also announced in the reorganization ordinance that they will facilitate the return of Kashmiri Pandits, besides ensuring them full security and protection. The Kashmiris have always said that Kashmiri Pandits are welcome to return, but not in the other areas, but they can live there in their own homes, which they had in their own places. But at the same time, India has categorically refused to give a right to return to the refugees who are living in Pakistan and Azad Kashmir. This is an alarming situation that those refugees, they will have no right to return to Indian occupied Kashmir. So I think we have listened. Let us go to United Kingdom to listen from Claire Bidwell how her organization is doing the campaign and what are her views on this subject. Claire, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for organising this and inviting us along, and two great speakers there to start us off. So, and with yourself covering a lot of the options. I think, you know, it obviously when we're looking for solutions to this crisis, it's very complex and there's many levels to it and layers to it in different facets of society. So it's very encouraging when my work or my vision and my team's work has been for the people's movement and to try and bring the Kashmiris' voices out because of where they've been silent. So that's really heartening and encouraging, because that for me is where the solution lies. If we bring the power from the people to, in individual countries, but obviously together to our governments, to the UN, and to make sure we get the United Nations functioning as per their resolutions and their articles and charters. So, I mean, for myself, I came in on this on a very, the basic human level, the same as us all, connected with somebody that was unable to reach his family. And it was just on that simple level of somebody wasn't able to contact their parents, it seemed, and then hearing about the revocation and the dictatorship of that decision where the troops were moved in, people curfewed in their homes with regards to the 5th of August 2019. I'm aware now this has been an ongoing conflict for 73 years or even for a long, long time, but was never aware of it and realized, I was looking around the world, our country, after that thinking, well, this isn't right. And yet, as somebody said earlier, it's based very much on justice. This isn't just, this could be any one of us treated this way. Why is there nobody in the world standing up? Wasn't in our media, wasn't in world media. I had to go hunting for it. And it was driven by that, that sense of humanity and injustice and looking around. And then it just built to connecting with other people. And then that unity and the journey, essentially, we looked from the word go to a range of solidarity event globally, where we wanted every country, and it was people-based, to be having a cup of tea with Kashmir. So essentially us trying to reach out to other people grew our connections, grew my knowledge, and the work done by the Kashmiris is phenomenal, and sometimes it's lovely being surrounded by these walking encyclopedias, because people have got their different skills, and as we've said earlier, they're putting their time and their efforts where their knowledge is, whether that's on the legal level, whether that's on the political level, diplomatic level, in the halls of powers, or on the streets. There's so many layers where people are raising the voices. So having those connections has made it very diverse. I think within it all, we then realized, within dialogue of a group, we set up the disunity, or, that all kind of divide and rule, where there was this very much where people were supported, where they felt the problem was, who was to be supported, who shouldn't, whether they wanted to go with Pakistan, whether they wanted to go with India. And sometimes this was coming above all these violations. And so it was this energy there to let's develop the unity where Kashmiris get their say, where they get to decide as promised and as per international rights and basic human rights. Every country has the right to self-determination enshrined in the treaty. There's lots of, no human rights are being met within Kashmir. So, and it's all being ignored. So that link with us all together was about, let's pull together for self-determination. Let's argue about who's doing what or where you want to go afterwards. And we could all work on that. But it's pulling in all the different, and respecting all the different dynamics into this problem and trying to knit those together as well, so that when we raise the Kashmiris' voices, we're raising it fairly and not, from an international perspective, from the outside looking in, I can see the dynamics of our Western media. And, at the moment, the international community are facilitating India, and through many different ways. Economics is the biggest one. They're not even really aware of the threat of India yet, or, I don't know if COVID has hidden that, or if they do, but they're not telling us. I mean, we saw the example with the COVID Delta variant. Pakistan went on the red list well before India, even though India had that raging surge. And I think it was Keir Starmer that called the Delta variant that's now raging in our country the Boris variant. And, that belief that they did not close our borders down further. So this is also an international issue because it's, as I say, it's been kept hidden. To bring in a different dynamic to this, what we are finding more and more, and I think also needs to be challenged and explored, is on social media, the amount of Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts that have been being closed, but it's now getting more prolific. I heard from one person just last night, devastated on Facebook, 30,000 followers, just raising the voice that was for political prisoners. You see Malik, and it had just been removed. No warnings, no nothing, gone. And then another gentleman in the UK just the day before, distraught because his group, which he'd been working on to do his bit to raise awareness on the international forum of what's going on in Kashmir, also had been removed. And then he'd put violations on him. I myself have a permanent Twitter ban. I was informed. I've lost about 6 or 7 accounts. I'm never rude, I never swear, I'm just educating, I'm just sharing. And to be banned, a permanent ban from Twitter, very, very unjust as well. I've lost 2 personal pages on Facebook, which was all my family memorabilia, etc. Because of Kashmir, I'm on my 3rd one now. Same with a group. I did have an initial group. We had 4,000 in it nearly, and that was removed, disabled. Same with a page, a working page I had. Once had 20K followers, the next one had 7K followers, and they're just removed when all you're trying to do is educate. So there's obviously a fear, you know, beyond elsewhere that is stopping us trying to get the voices out. The Red for Kashmir campaign came from the Kashmiris themselves, and we look at it like we tried to fan the flames. When the 5th of August arrived and they were under those atrocious conditions, the profiles were turned red. People were, you know, they were obviously clamped and turned off, but the Kashmiri diaspora and those with the skills to get heard, the profiles went red. There were protests on the street, Stand with Kashmir, who were using their voice and going red. So it was just, we kind of, you know, noticed perhaps a couple of months back that there were more Kashmiris disappearing off social media. There seemed to be like the loss of heart. As we've discussed before, Modi's going through Kashmir at the rate of knots, you know, it just the rate of knots. And we probably don't even know the half of it that is going on. And I believe also, you know, we're looking at genocide, we're looking at severe human rights beyond, you know, and just as the first speaker said, all that's been taken away the way it's been planned. I know that, you know, the UK government, when we were, or the Foreign Office it was, when there was land being sold about a year ago from India, they were sponsoring an event whereby they were selling Kashmiri land, and it was sponsored by our Foreign Office. So, you know, that again was ludicrous. I wrote via my MP to the Foreign Office looking for answers for that. But to this day, I have still not had my response. So, you know, and that for me, that brings it back to the people. You know, we have to make the people aware of what we're all up against. And sometimes I get people saying, you know, about minding my own business, but I think for me, you know, we're humans wherever we are and what's ever happening, and that's what we need to be standing up for. So for the Red for Kashmir campaign from the Kashmiris, and I wanted it to see that I wanted it to see that as their idea. We're fanning the flames, but we want anybody to take it and run with it, with the turning the profiles red, uploading something red on the day. We're looking at a candle vigil in all countries on the 5th of August. And then there are some demonstrations at the weekends around that. So, you know, again, it's the process, the unity that brings us together. The more people we can make aware of this, you know, the better. So the impacts, you know, there on every scale of life and everywhere. The extreme Islamophobia, we're seeing, you know, it's like we were saying within the football, the different, you know, layers in the society there that are going on. I do remember when the Black Lives Matter movement arose up after, you know, the gentleman in August getting killed by the knee, and people were throwing, you know, they came out onto the streets and they were throwing all these statues in the river. And whilst, you know, I could have been one of them and I could have been with them, I understood their sentiment. I remember feeling very upset that, guys, if I could have spoken to them all, it would have been like, this is happening. right now in Kashmir. You know, rape where it's used as the weapon of war. You know, they're half widows, the blinding, the pellet guns. It's happening right now. And you're on the streets throwing statues in the river because where this has come from, you know, it's the finding the solutions. And I would love to be able to tap into that for the Kashmiris, you know, making those links with the Black Lives Matter people, the Palestinian activists, because we're all essentially the mechanics of what's happening, you know, are essentially the same in occupied territories, in occupied countries. And so the solution, therefore, is if United Nations was functional, was following its resolutions, following its human rights articles and charters, we would be living in a world that's a completely different place. And I think that's a battle for many of us, you know, to take forward and move on with. So, yeah, I mean, that some of the people have discovered the deeper mechanics behind it all. So I hope I've added something onto the top layers of that. But again, essentially, we want the Kashmiris to be heard because I don't think they've ever been as silenced as they have now. And the stories, again, with the Facebook, the Kashmiris saying that they've been seen by the military on their Facebook sharing their posts, and they've actually received a beaten up and told not to post any more things like that on their Facebook. So there's different ways that they're all being silenced and clamped. I think the political prisoners was the other thing I just wanted to raise the awareness of for people, because the Kashmiris don't have their own voice at the moment. There is nobody there speaking up for them. They're not in at the United Nations on their own right. We've got their leaders locked up in jail. You know, there's that fear, isn't there? We can see the dictator control because the leaders are removed from this and they're imprisoned. And it's, you know, there's big injustices going on. We see the Geneva Convention being broken, and this is where this is what the people need to know, the general international community and the people, so that we can then come to bring more power on our politicians and governments. We're seeing some, you know, we are seeing some optimism within some of the politicians, the fact it's cross-party, and we're seeing many people stand up, and people, you know, in India as well. It's not, we often say this isn't off, it's not anti-India, it's about, you know, the behavior. And so all working together to solve this. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's, you know, let Kashmir decide. It's their say, it's up to them. That resolves half the issues. If everybody can work together and make that movement for Kashmiris, that I believe is where the solution lies. Again, having to work fast, because India are a threat, without a doubt. India are a threat to Kashmiris, to Muslims, and they're a threat to the world. So thank you very much for inviting me to participate.
Thank you, Claire Wilman, for your input. Really, you are the foot soldier to fight against this discrimination on social media and other things in the UK and all social media sites all over the globe. I think after the Stand with Kashmir hashtag, which soon after the abrogation of Article 370 started in UK, this your campaign is the second largest campaign now, which is going on Kashmir, though the Stand with Kashmir campaign has rather lowered down currently, but your campaign is very much alive there and is creating more and more awareness at global level. I could see the people from all over the globe joining your campaign. I pay my tributes to all those who are joining this campaign, especially the Naira from South Africa, who is your colleague who's designing all those posters and all that. I pay my tribute to her, convey my regards to her. Our next speaker will be Ambassador Tahmina Jajwa. She doesn't need any introduction. She has been the Foreign Secretary of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, the first woman who was assumed that highest office in Pakistan. She was the ambassador of Pakistan, permanent president of Pakistan to United Nations Geneva, and also ambassador to Italy, and also Albania, San Marino, and Slovenia, with extra accreditations to those places. Ambassador Tahmina Jajwa has been a guiding force for us while campaigning for the rights in Geneva, especially in Human Rights Council. She is always there to help us, to support us, to guide us. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Vani Sab. I'd like to thank the Kashmir Institute of International Relations for inviting me to this very important webinar, especially on the sidelines of the 47th session of the Human Rights Council, where we do discuss human rights. But unfortunately, my experience with the Human Rights Council is that the voices that are out there speaking for the Kashmiris, presenting their point of view and the terrible situation that they're undergoing, not only after 5th August, but prior to 5th August as well. The difficulties that they've faced for years and years have been presented by Pakistan in the Human Rights Council, the Kashmiris themselves, and some other, a couple of friendly countries. I must express, and I must take this opportunity to thank Dr. Mubin Shah and Claire Bedwell for their very comprehensive presentations and very effective presentations. What Dr. Shah has brought to the table is the reality of the economic lives of the Kashmiris and how they have been affected, and how that slowly means that they are being economically disempowered, not only in Kashmir itself, but in the rest of India as well, where people think that they are a part of that country. But in reality, let's not forget, and before I move forward, Claire Bedwell, I'm very impressed by the work that you're doing, because it is this work that will take us forward. It is not statements or speeches or whatever, but it is this effective work that will take us forward. And let me say that when the last difficulties that were faced by the Palestinian people became a movement within Western countries, and there were these large demonstrations that took place, that's the kind of effort we need for Kashmir as well, so that the world does recognize the reality of what the Kashmiris are undergoing, and the reality that they are being gradually dispossessed of their own resources, and their human rights are completely destroyed. I'd like to mention here Senator Lee Rhiannon, who I had the opportunity of meeting in Islamabad, and I must thank her very much for the work that she has done in Australia as well, in the Parliament as well. So these are different strands that come together ultimately that will help move what Dr. Shah has said, change the narrative, the Kashmiri narrative, and to turn it into a people's movement. It has got to be a movement which clearly demonstrates what's happening in Kashmir. As far as we are concerned, I mean, as Kashmir was earlier on a disputed territory, was a dispute, and it was a dispute whether it was international or bilateral. There have been several discussions on it. But we were very clear that it was a question of foreign occupation. And all that's being played out in Kashmir right now is basically a further strengthening of the foreign occupation, because there was a certain facade that was kept earlier on, despite the reality that there was massive human rights violations that continued from the late 80s, from the time of the independence of Pakistan and India to later, when in the 80s it became a movement and was crushed in the most despicable manner possible. And the world kept, unfortunately, quiet. Pakistan tried very hard. Pakistan tried to bring a resolution to the then Human Rights Commission, but the world was too attracted to India because of its economic and political power. And let me tell you now as well, what really depresses me when you go to the Human Rights Council, for example, is the complete hypocrisy of what people talk about human rights. While Kashmiris suffer and are in immense pain, there'll be very few, or rather just a couple or so, who will raise their voice against the situation that prevailed in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So we have always believed that in Pakistan that this is a situation of foreign occupation. What August 5th did was that it set aside the perspective of a dispute as well, and now Indian actions that have followed it clearly demonstrate that. It is clear now that the situation of foreign occupation is prevailing, and this can be seen through the stranded actions of foreign occupiers. One, the physical repression and violence that continues, and how it's been completely kept away from the rest of the world through banning the media and what Claire Bidwell has said as well, through trying to stop people to talk about it. And this obviously, but the physical repression and violence is immense. And I will not go into the details because Claire has already spoken about that. Secondly, there's an effort to change the legal framework to depict that the occupied territory is the occupier's territory. And this is what is being done in Kashmir right now, that the occupied territory is now being depicted as the occupier's territory through more than 200 or so laws that have been changed. And for example, there are the delimitations, the political delimitations that being done, the way the democratic changes that are being undertaken. And I completely agree with the term settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is at work in Kashmir right now, where gradually the Kashmiris are being disempowered of everything that was theirs. And the facade was kept to some extent by certain specific status that was given to Kashmir at the time of independence. But that has been removed as well. So now there is the stark reality is that the foreign occupier is trying to destroy completely whatever was Kashmiri. We have always held that this is an international dispute which needs to be addressed through applying the principle of self-determination. Self-determination is one that I know everyone there are very few takers for it, but there was decolonization that took place. There was the Trusteeship Council in the UN. There was the decolonization process that went on. And the major principle that put it together was the principle of self-determination, which is in the UN Charter, a part of the UN Charter, which is a part of the two covenants, international covenants on civil and political rights and civil, economic, social, and cultural rights. So all of these are valid principles that need to be taken into account and that need to be implemented. On the narrative thing, I completely agree, and I am glad that that Claire has been able to do some work in this regard. But I saw a Kashmiri movie maker who was trying to do a movie, start working on movies, presenting the Kashmiri narrative, and that's what's required. Because what's happened is that whenever you look at movies coming from Bollywood, or you see movies coming from other parts of the world as well, the focus is that the Kashmiri is maligned, whereas the Kashmiri is the victim. And this is what needs to be projected. And this is what this young Kashmiri filmmaker was trying to do and said, sort of develop films. There was another international Kashmiri artist who started making photographs, pictures of paintings of what was happening in Kashmir. This is the type of messaging that is extremely important. And of course, the narrative has to be corrected completely by all of us, and all of us who are now here in this webinar need to see ways of how to move forward on changing the narrative. There is to be work that has to be done on the legal and media front in order to relentlessly strip away the Indian narrative, which has got a lot of ground outside. And then, of course, we need to all look at together, if possible, and work with some of these organized Kashmiri organizations as well on civil disobedience, how effective civil disobedience movements have worked in the past, and to explore that in order to minimize the costs for the Kashmiris, and in order to educate people and dispel this awful negative narrative against the Kashmiris. So yes, there is a lot that has to be done, and I completely agree that no one government can do it. The Pakistan government is trying very hard, but it is the parliaments, it is the media, it is the professionals that have to get together to see how to move forward on these fronts. Otherwise, you don't want, it happened in the 80s, in the early 90s, when there was a movement that the Kashmiris had started, but which was completely suppressed. We don't want a repeat of that. And we don't want a repeat of the fact that there is such a huge displacement of Kashmiris taking place, and more people coming in from other parts of, from parts of India to settle in Kashmir. That needs to be stopped. Otherwise, the Kashmiris' right to self-determination is going to be just one thing of the past. We need to work together on that. And I thank Vani Saab for this opportunity to speak on this issue, because it's an issue which is very close to the heart of many Pakistanis, and it is very close to my heart as well, because I have seen how difficult it is to raise the voice of the Kashmiris in international context. Let me tell you that I was most disappointed by some of my European partners in their inability to be able to come together and bring out something concrete in the Human Rights Council. Pakistan has tried, but it is the human rights, it is a huge amount of hypocrisy that prevails in the work of the council. We would never give up. We will never give up. We will continue to support the Kashmiri cause. The Prime Minister Imran Khan, feels very strongly about it, and he has spoken about it. So let me say that this is a good opportunity for the whole world to know where the Kashmiri situation is and how we move forward on it. And that Facebook and Twitter and all these social media handles cannot just continue to suppress the Kashmiri movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your enlightening interventions, and ending with a hope that we will continue our struggle and support for the people of Kashmir. And this is a very strong message for the people on ground who are putting a very brave resistance against the brutal oppression of Indian occupation forces. Now I'll bring in Mr. Ahmed Qureshi for his intervention. Mr. Qureshi, you have the floor. Unmute yourself, Qureshi. You started just.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Wani. It's an honor to be with this very, very distinguished panel, and to see so many friendly faces. And I'd like to especially salute Ambassador, former Secretary Temina Jajwa Saiba for her great and amazing work, and also Lee Rhiannon and others, and Claire Bidwell, and so many others here on this panel. I'll be very quick. I just bring here the perspective of a journalist and a human rights activist. And I would like to share with you this, that it's often a paradox for somebody in my position, because as a journalist, we rationalize the way the world works. But as human rights activists, of course, you have to be idealistic in some ways. So for me as a journalist, I try to sort of make an internal compromise between rationalizing how the international community approaches conflicts and then the urge to really be idealistic when dealing with a human rights situation, a conflict. So I just would like to share very quickly 3 or 4 very quick and brief points that are just basically a sort of a combination of what I feel as right now at this very moment as a journalist and at the same time as a human rights activist. And I'd like to begin by saying that I feel that it's important to recognize a shift in the global approach towards Kashmir conflict, and also an international shift in the approach towards India. And I think it's important. And despite all the grievances and all the really very serious issues that Claire Bidwell, Ambassador Tahmina, and others highlighted, I see a huge shift in the last 5 years in the way the world, the media, the people in the intelligentsia, and think tanks are now approaching and analyzing in India. And I see a huge dent in the romanticization of India, which existed from the independence of India in 1947 up, I would say, until 2016 and possibly until 2019. There was this immense romanticization of India, and we as human rights activists and journalists, we used to face this huge wall that you couldn't somehow surmount because India was romanticized as this amazing example of a developing country, which it was. There's no doubt about this. India was an example of a developing country, and it produced many great examples of development, of social development, and so forth. But again, there was this huge wall which you could, and as a huge market, you could not surmount that romanticization of India as this beautiful example of a developing country that somehow simply cannot be criticized for whatever is happening whether in the Indian society or in Kashmir. So I see a change. I see a huge dent in that. I see it's no longer a taboo internationally to dissect the Indian society, to see the society for what it is. To see, for example, just a couple of days ago, I was reading a report in one of the international newspapers. I think it was the New York Times. And it was about COVID, how India is dealing with COVID. And it was specifically about how the people who depend on tourism in the city of Agra and depend on Taj Mahal, which is an international tourist attraction. I was glad to see that international journalists now were discussing how even this monument to love, Taj Mahal, was being now targeted by extremists in the Indian society. So I think all of these taboos. So there's a need to also recognize a shift and to exploit that shift internationally. A second thing is, I think I also, as a journalist, now I'm speaking as a journalist, I also recognize how we see strands. I wouldn't make a big deal of it, but we see strands of pressure from the Biden administration on the government of India to normalize the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir, and we see some elements of that pressure translate into attempts by the Modi government to possibly try or attempt to create the impression that they're trying to normalize the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. So it's a positive, it's a good thing that there is some kind of pressure on with that regard, and of course the international media. But the problem is, I think, as human rights defenders and activists. Now I shift gears now from being a journalist, but as human rights activists, how to translate these little strands, these movements, this shift in how the international community, the media approaches, sees, analyzes India, the human rights situation in India, in Kashmir. Some of these
pressures like the Biden administration now to normalize the situation in India, how to translate that into something more substantial, I think it's a huge thing. I don't think we can, I can cover this point right now, but I just would like to float it. And also, one more thing is, as Kashmir activist, I think there's a lot more, as Ambassador Janjua just mentioned, there's a lot more that activists, we as Kashmir activists can do. For example, why is it that Claire Bidwell is alone facing the wrath of the big tech without finding, obviously, individually, I see support for her, tremendous support on social media. But how come and why is it that we don't see organized Kashmiri activism to defend and restore Claire's presence on social media the way, for example, pro-Palestine activists do worldwide? And I must say, pro-Palestine activists are far more well-organized and better organized than pro-Kashmir activists. And we're nowhere near actually to the way the pro-Palestine activists operate. And I see, for example, whenever if there's any case, I don't see many really, but if there's any case of censorship on a pro-Palestine activist, I see a very well organized, very effective campaign to help that person. I don't see that in the case, for example, Claire Bidwell, other than individual attempts to really express support for her and for her work. We need as pro-Kashmir human rights activists, we need to be better organized. We don't see that organization, and that is a criticism. I'm criticizing myself actually. I haven't taken an initiative really to work on that, but I share that with all of you, and I think this is something we need to look at as pro-Kashmir activists. And last, it's very, very important, of course, the role of the government of Pakistan. The government of Pakistan is probably the only government in the world. And before the government of Pakistan, I just would like to say, I also, as a journalist, recognize a lot of countries are actually directly and indirectly probably paying attention and maybe in small ways helping on the Kashmir conflict. Many. I mean, in my regular journalism work, just a few weeks ago, I came across this amazing piece of information, which was a surprise for me, which I then verified, which was that the Indian Ministry of External Affairs, which is the Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, actually last year in 2020 summoned the ambassador of Egypt, and I think it's a lady ambassador of Egypt in New Delhi, 8 times. During the 12 months of 2020, she was summoned to the Indian Ministry of External Affairs unofficially. It was not publicized in the media. And I didn't write about it. I'm just mentioning it right now for the first time, actually, openly. And I got it, and I have this from a very responsible diplomat, and then I verified it and I confirmed it that she was. Why? Because the Indian government felt on various international forums that Egypt was showing some understanding to the position of Kashmiris with regards to this conflict. So probably the Indian Ministry of External Affairs saw Indian ambassadors in the General Assembly, in the Security Council, possibly in Geneva Human Rights Council, and the OIC in Jeddah, probably saw certain signs which disturbed them, Egypt being a longtime partner of India in the non-aligned movement, and seeing some signs of a shift or a change. So what I'm trying to say is that many countries probably are looking at with the shift in the global media approach on India and Kashmir. So I think we need to exploit all of these things. And I conclude by mentioning the government of Pakistan specifically, and I being in Islamabad, of course, as an activist, as a journalist, I interact with government officials, and the government of Pakistan has done a lot. There's no question about that. And I think it'll be unfair to the government, and surely we can critique how the government, the policy on Kashmir, but the Pakistani government has done a lot. However, I think I have to say there's a huge challenge facing the government of Pakistan, which I'm yet to see how the government would deal with, which is how to translate the immense interest on the human rights situation in Indian occupied Kashmir globally, and I see media coverage and so forth, how to translate that into also a focus on conflict resolution in Kashmir. So we see this intense talk about human rights situation in Kashmir, but very little on the conflict resolution and the right to self-determination. So I think there's a huge challenge before the government of Pakistan to translate this new interest on the human rights situation in Indian occupied Kashmir and also within India, to translate that into also some movement toward conflict resolution in Kashmir and right to self-determination. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohan.
Thank you, Ahmed Qureshi, for enlightening us about the shift in international media and also how we can translate that in the human rights activism and what steps government of Pakistan should take to take advantage of this changing scenario at human rights situation, human rights level at international forums, and also through the different reports coming from different international NGOs on Kashmir. Now I will request Senator Lee for her intervention. Senator Lee, as we all know, is an Australian. She was a senator in Australian Senate from 2011 to August 2018. I'm also honored to have met her during her visit to Islamabad and Azad Kashmir. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm really enjoying the seminar. It really does give me a lot of hope. I think coming together and speaking together is wonderful to hear. So many of the speakers, all the speakers, have a commitment to building a strong social movement for Kashmir. Is just wonderful to be part of. So I do thank the organisers and particularly thank the Kashmiri Institute of International Affairs. I'm speaking to you from Sydney, Australia. I'm actually on the traditional land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, one of the many tribes that make up the First Nations of this land. The struggle of First Nations or Aboriginal people is actually similar to the struggle of Kashmiri people, resisting colonisation and fighting for their right to determine their own future. Because as we know, and as we're feeling with the contributions tonight, or today, is self-determination is a fundamental human right. So look, I really, as I've said, I really want to reiterate, I appreciate that I'm able to join this webinar and participate because it's vital that we work out together how we strengthen our solidarity with Kashmir and Jammu and build that all-important global support movement. So in my talk, I'd like to recap a little bit about August 2019, also examine some of the developments with regard to the impact of COVID, the relationship between India and Israel. I think something very important. If we're going to build a social movement, there's a lot to learn there. And then some concluding remarks about how we strengthen our stand for Kashmir. Look, first off, I'd really like to pay tribute to local Kashmirian journalists and activists. Like one of the most ruthless things when that lockdown and total takeover occurred in August 2019 was the shutting down of phone connections of the internet with a clear intent to stop coverage of what was going on in Kashmir. Look, I'm 70. I've been involved in politics literally since I was 15. I grew up with the Vietnam War. And the difference that I've noticed this time, so many, not all my friends are political, but many are, so many do not know what happens in Kashmir. And it just constantly brings home to me what a big job we have. And largely why that is, it's never in our news here. It barely even gets into our social media feeds. So again, for me, we are pretty isolated in Australia. It's wonderful to hear what's happening in other parts of the world in the struggle for Kashmir. So in paying tribute to Kashmiri journalists and activists, I think we need to remember that so many actually risk their lives to report on the impact India's total takeover has had on health, education services, the local economy, people's day-to-day lives, like the killings, the disappearances, the harassment of women, and many other crimes carried out by Indian armed forces need to be known. One of the many tragedies that I find of India's action against Kashmir and Jammu has been the increased militarization of this region, which I think is incredibly important to build into the narrative about India. And I think it's a way to help dispel the narrative of wonderful, beautiful, colourful India. Because let's remember again, in August 2019, another horror aspect of what they did was send more troops, tens of thousands more troops into Kashmir. And this boosted the number of Indian Army, Air Force, paramilitary and special forces close to 1 million. Now, this poses the most massive security risk for the whole world, let alone the subcontinent, and obviously for Kashmiris themselves, who are in the front line of the suffering because of this militarization. Then we have COVID that we really do need to speak about because it's been made so much worse for Kashmiris because of the way India is handling Kashmir. There's reports about how hard it is for health workers because they are literally impeded by the Indian government's policy in this region. There's a very useful article in the Health and Human Rights Journal in April 2020, last year. And it reported that the low-speed 2G network, and it's worth remembering that while Modi now says, oh, we've restored the internet, they've restored it to 2G, which is just about useless for what, much of the world is now used to. So considering that's what's there, Jammu health workers find it just about impossible to access public health guidelines. And it stops health workers being able to have the latest research, to get the accurate updates on transmission in the different regions. And it also means that contact tracing as a strategy to prevent the spread of COVID is next to impossible. So in considering how we support the Kashmiri struggle for self-determination, I also think we really need to analyse the tactics of the Modi government in the rest of India, because to deal with Kashmir, we need to address the BJP and the tactics of their party. They're using their power to attack groupings that they judge to be their enemies. And I'm particularly there referring to Indian Muslims and the nation's progressive forces. Leading intellectuals have been arrested under authoritarian legislation such as the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Often you see UAPA as shorthand for it, and it's worth really checking that out. Muslims, many who have families resident in India for generations, are being targeted by citizenship laws designed to remove their legal standing as citizens. And let's remember police officers who responded to the 2020 May violence in Delhi, and I'm not going to call it a riot because that misrepresents what happened to the Muslims. It was police, Indian police, who participated in the killing of 52 Muslims. Then there's the ban on interfaith marriages, the increase in lynchings of Muslims, and the rise in Muslim deaths in custody. Then there's the building of the Ram Mandir temple on the site of the Babri Masjid Mosque, and the BJ's push to introduce a universal civil code that would effectively victimise Christian and Muslim minorities. That further demonstrates what the Modi government's policy of Hindu extremism is doing to India. And can I say, the penetration of Hindutva, and I do apologise for my pronunciations, Hindu extremism into Australia, and I know it's happening in other Western countries, is another serious part of the Indian government's agenda that I believe many people would be alarmed about when they heard about this Hindu extremism, the supremacy that they're trying to push in so many parts of the world, let alone India itself. Now, to some extent, the seriousness of this situation is slowly gaining more international attention. And I think it's worth bringing in here Genocide Watch. Dr. Gregory Stanton has spoken about the very real threat of genocide in Indian-occupied Kashmir and Jammu. Now, these are his own words. We believe that the Indian government's actions in Kashmir have been an extreme case of persecution and could well lead to genocide. He also said, Kashmir is under military rule and it is a very clear pre-genocidal situation. And when you look at the documents on how genocide plays out, pre-genocidal situation is a stage you go through to get to genocide. So this is what Genocide Watch has been working on. Now, these comments from a respected international expert should ring out a warning across all nations, all peoples, about what is happening. Now, I did want to share with you who Dr. Stanton is, because so often when you talk about genocide, I find people still trying to discredit you. Like, he has incredible standing. He worked in the US State Department during President Bill Clinton's term. He drafted the UN Security Council's resolutions that created the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the Burundi Commission of Inquiry. And I think this is the work of the Genocide Watch is something that we need to use extensively in, again, redirecting the narrative on India. Now, others have also touched on this worrying development about the relationship between India and Israel. And I also did want to make comment on parts of it, because this is very sinister. Israel has huge experience in suppressing people who have got a right to campaign. And indeed, I don't want people to take up armed struggle, but let's remember there are UN resolutions which set out the right of people to take up armed struggle when they are colonized. So the Israeli government is very sophisticated in how it operates. Firstly, I find that sometimes people are surprised that India, which was traditionally a supporter of Palestine, is now being very gung-ho and out there for Israel. Now, it actually, again, what for India, why it is under BJP, why it's keen on Israel, has a lot to do with the current government's supremacy policy of Hindutva. And the close relationship between India and Israel has worrying implications for peace and security of the subcontinent and the very future of Kashmir. So what I'm referring to there, and I'll just give a little bit more details, is both in terms of military relations between India and Israel, and also the issue of settlements. India is the largest buyer of Israeli military equipment. For the decade 1999 to 2009, military trade and bilateral cooperation between the two nations was worth about $9 billion. This involves joint military and security training and sharing intelligence. There's many sinister aspects to this relationship. Indian security forces work closely with Mossad, the notorious intelligence agency of Israel. Israel actually advertises that its military equipment is field tested. And I think that people would be so offended if they knew what that meant. What it means is that it's being tested on Palestinians. Palestinians have died so they can modernize this equipment so it'll be more effective in suppressing Kashmiris and other people who are struggling for their rights. Cooperation between the Israeli Defense Force and the Indian military forces is extensive. And as I've said, there's the two sides to it. And I'd like to move on to the issue about the demographics, Kashmiri demographics. For many years, India has been assisting military personnel to retire to this region. And there's a reason for that, of changing the demographics, and other people have spoken about this, and it's very sinister. New laws have been passed, including the new domicile law. Indian authorities are now issuing domicile certificates to Indians and non-residents, entitling them to residency rights and government jobs. This is such a clear form of settler colonialism in its crudest form. And it achieves a democratic change. So Kashmir, which as we know at the moment is India's only Muslim majority region, may in a period of time, may no longer be majority Muslim, which makes it so much easier for the BJP authorities to achieve what they're intent on doing. Tragically, the threat of COVID is being used as cover by Indian forces to advance this form of occupation. And this is just a comment that I picked up in one of the news reports from a school teacher who didn't want to give his full name. It's from Srinagar. And this is what he said, and again, makes reference to the Palestine situation. The school teacher says, giving land, homes and jobs to Indian soldiers and their families is how India will try to change the demographics here, no different to what Israel has done with its settlers in the West Bank. This has also been reiterated by India's Consul General in New York. That person themselves was in a private gathering, and it was recorded that what he said was, if the Israeli people can do it, we can also do it. So there's this very ugly side to how the Indian army is working. And it's not just in this military sense, it's what they're doing in moving large numbers of their personnel into Kashmir. The worry is that in following the Israeli model, Indian troops will turn military outposts. And we know since August the 5th, 2019, they've been stepping up the establishment of military outposts. They can turn into small settlements turn into large settlements, and in time, they become towns that expand in size with shops and schools and hospitals. I've been to Palestine. I've seen the invasion of the settlements. It is just extraordinary. You really realize they're like the first troops that move into a lot of areas, but it's presented that they're wonderful homes. They're gated communities with 24-hour military security, and you have to fear that that's where India is headed. Harold, so the people of Jammu and Kashmir are facing a shocking situation. Having been denied the right of self-determination for over 70 years, they're now facing an escalation of Indian settler colonialism. And this is happening when the world is focused on an international pandemic health crisis. The attention of many potential supporters for Kashmiri human rights and right to self-determination is distracted. We just need to face that. I think our priority needs to be on building an international movement to amplify the voice of Kashmir. And it's warmed my heart so much to hear all the speakers reiterate that so strongly. And because we do need a movement similar with the passion and the energy to the great anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa in the later decades of the last century, and to the Palestinian solidarity movement that today is mobilizing the support of millions of people around the world. If our demand for Azad Kashmir is to ring out with the strength and passion that we have and so many people have, we need to change the narrative of colourful, friendly, incredible India. That's how it is presented to us. That's what I grew up as a little girl. Even though I come from this very political background, I grew up thinking India was this most wonderful place. And it did have this projection of being secular and a secular democracy. That's long gone now. What's happening under the BJP is so serious. If we're to reflect the reality for what faces Muslims, Dalits, communists, Christians, we need to work on this narrative. And I believe it's very much part of building a movement in support of Kashmir and Jammu. I noticed in the chat from somebody said AJ suggested that we should continue tonight's work as a working group to help bring together the threads that we all have a commitment to in a very solid way. And I hope that that does happen. Thank you again for inviting me. I found it informative and I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Your very enlightening presentation. You rightly point out we need to, on one hand, change the narrative on Kashmir to have a perfect narrative on Kashmir, as was said by Dr. Mubin Shah and then Ambassador Tamina Janjua, and also to enlighten the world about the current India. It's not secular democratic India. It is the India which has criminalized each and every sector of India and has become a Hindutva regime, a fascist India now. And we have to make a moment for that. As per working group is concerned, you are all on our working group. We always need your advice, your expert opinions in order to take this movement forward. On 5th of August, we will be releasing a research report on towards the Indianization of Kashmir in broad daylight in context of mechanization and its impacts. So this report will be released. I hope Ambassador Tanima Geneva will be in Pakistan at that time, and hopefully she will join us at that report launching ceremony. Now I go to Dr. Vikas is there. Hello, Dr. Vikas.
Thank you very much, Altaf Hussain Wani Saab. And I guess it's been great listening others with their perspectives and about the quite educating, particularly on the overall situation in Kashmir. I would just like to add few things maybe on colonization and this idea of settler colonization. I mean, if we see the moment of, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So if you see the phase of Kashmir movement particularly, so from 47 onward, I mean, if you see, analyze the overall situation, the entire relationship between between the state of Jammu and Kashmir and the India actually has been on the trajectory of a colonizer and a colonized. But if you see from pre-1990, if you see the situation, the overall approach of Indian state has been to seize the political space actually, may it be the rigged elections, may it be they're squeezing the political space. But if you see the post-1990 situation, there has been a lot of things happening towards the larger project of colonization of Kashmir. If you see, there has been a lot of laws, there has been a lot of transformation in their approach, particularly in terms of introducing laws which are arbitrary. I mean, if you see Armed Forces Special Power Act and others that actually were targeting people's movement, restricting them, and trying to, I guess, counter their resistance and without giving them due rights of defending themselves. On the other side, if you see post 5th of August, this entire framework, when we see and analyze, we understand one thing, that there's a gradual, structural, informed, and consistent pattern of depriving Kashmiris from their political rights, and actually sort of by eroding their identity, by eroding their culture, by their language, and then of course their other rights. If you see the Article 35A and other things, when there's a larger debate, we come to know that, I mean, there has been a consistent pattern of colonizing powers that when they intervene somewhere, they come with certain slogans. If you see in the history, many colonizers came with the idea of modernizing people. Many colonizers came with the idea of, teaching civilization or, civilizing people. Simultaneously, this idea of intervention in Kashmir came with the idea of Naya Kashmir, New Kashmir with development and all these things. But actually it didn't happen. What we have seen is that there has been an effort to counter the resistance of Kashmiris towards their fundamental political rights on three areas. Particularly, if you see, there has been legal, there has been political, economic, and social as well. So on the legal side, we see that there has been a plethora of laws introduced after 5th of August, aiming towards depriving people from their rights, one, and then the eradicating the checks actually and the controls that have been there under Article 35A to clear the ways for the New Delhi government to intervene in Kashmir without any legal resistance. On the other side, if you see on the economic side, as Dr. Mubin has also mentioned, I mean, there has been consistent efforts. If you see that the idea of a colonizer is to occupy not only the resources, but if you see that it is trying to reduce Kashmiri society to mere as a consumer, not the producer. So you try to project and you try to create an environment where the society in an economic model work to produce raw material only, but there is no real creation of jobs or supply of the technology and all these things, because you just want to control them and their resources as well. On economic front, I mean, if you see after these legal interventions, there has been no match and comparison, and there is not even there is a ground for the companies or the investor of Kashmir competing with the people from New Delhi on the areas of economic development. So I guess this was another way to open sort of floodgate of investors having huge money, and at the end of the day just capturing the entire market. And also at the end of the day the message is to and the impact is to deprive people economically as well and make them dependent of subservient. On the other side, if you see the social side and the political, I mean, this entire reorganization that came under with a certain idea of Naya Kashmir and new development, if you see that there has been a very, very strategic and thoughtful idea of a colonizer to further deprive people of Jammu and Kashmir and their political leadership from their rights. Even there was the pro-Indian parties, if you see that their overall approach was to see them with a certain lens of a religion. If you see they have been caged, if you see they have been put into the jails, all the leaders and even the leaders out, those have been jailed outside the territory of Jammu and Kashmir as well. So that there would be no political resistance, and the entire leadership, whatever, even if the leadership was pro-India, but it was for them the Kashmiri particularly identity was not is something that was a main issue for them. So the idea overall, if we frame the idea, what we understand is that anything which helps Kashmiris in their resistance, made with their language, made with their own very much identity, and made with their own culture, made with their political rights, whatever they had, they try to invade that. They try to they reduce the political, social, economic, and other space of Kashmiris to a level that they don't resist. Now there is a one fundamental question of the narrative which we've been speaking again and again. The fundamental question is, as Mr. Qureshi also has mentioned, the narrative about Kashmir, particularly Pakistan, as an advocate of the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and in official statement have been standing and saying about the Kashmiris' rights. The idea is we have to expand the very much nature of the debate. Expand in terms of the narrative, which is human rights centric, is of course human rights are very, very important. But of course, this also has a lot of other dimensions, including the very much this identity, this culture, this political rights, and the other dimensions of the Kashmiri people. On the other side, the civil society, the values of civil society, or the values of any democratic society, we need to see that how we can make, how we can integrate or maybe communicate the very much just values and the belief system of Kashmiri people, for which they are fighting, actually are resisting particularly, that should be properly communicated to the entire community. It's not about just a territorial gain of the land, but it's about the fundamental political and liberal values of the people. It's not the political rights, it's the right of association, right of freedom, and particularly about their fundamental political rights. And the last, I would like to say that of course the regional geopolitical situation keeps on changing. Fundamental what is that one of the great avenue of information, or maybe analyzing, understanding the situation of Kashmir, was the local media as well at some time. But we have seen the onslaught on the local media, the way BJP government and the state central government has reacted towards the free media is unprecedented. So if you read those papers, you come to know that it's just their space is reduced for writing anything which is factual. Now, I guess that is the need, that is the time where the people from particularly the liberated part of Kashmir, which is AJK, they need to come up. There has to be an effort, concerted effort to expand this narrative, to understand and to communicate what exactly this narrative of the Kashmiri society, how for them language is important, how for them their language, culture, and other things are related with their freedom and their identity particularly. And that's how I guess the voices, liberal voices of the world, the voices which and all the people who believe in fundamental human rights can connect more easily and help Kashmiris get their fundamental political and very just right. Thank you very much, Vanisa.
Thank you, Dr. Vikas. you wrote in the local media of Indian occupied Kashmir, how the spaces for the freedom movement or the right to freedom of expression and opinion has been suppressed, and how a law, which was already there in India, it was a federal law, UAPA, but this law was amended in 2019 and enacted in Kashmir. And through this law, now we see nobody can raise a voice in Kashmir against the India's illegal actions that it took on August 5th, 2019. And we have seen lots of journalists and human rights defenders were booked under this law. And now the space is online and offline. Online, you see, this law has been used for the journalists and human rights defenders, activists, and offline, we see the Public Safety Act is being used for the political leaders or activists. If they raise their voice, they are booked for that. So a change of narrative or building a narrative is an important point of what we have been discussing and what we try to achieve. Inshallah, in future, we can come to that. Now I will bring in Shani Ahmed, a good friend of ours. You have to wait a lot. Sorry for that. But Shani is the senior political advisor and peace strategist. Let us hear from Shani how we can achieve the peace.
Thank you very much, Saab. Vani, no, it's my pleasure to hear all these invaluable speakers. Wow, such a privilege. Thank you very much indeed. And by the way, congratulations to my very dear sister, Professor Shagufta Ashraf, for her latest achievements in her new titles. Oh, wow, I'm proud of you all. And in the meantime, I always wanted to visit Taj Mahal. I think if I do that one day, please remember, if I couldn't come back to my country, you will know the reason of that, because we are all standing for human rights and peace. In the meantime, to begin with, where that all began, will be fair enough to remember that colonialism of the past has significantly shaped the modern world. So particularly social and economical inequality that had been caused by the upper imperialist hand has significantly affected the repressed natives in the some cases resulting with the genocide. In fact, the history also proves that various Western countries as well have caused, applied and promoted colonialism, imperialism up till today. Alas, the sad reality is for the repressed natives in the occupied territories, the colonizing countries' attitudes are quite different in their victimized region, and their extractive behavior, usually based on control and elimination of the outstanding, the natives. Alike, the example set by India and today alike the practices taking place in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Hence, the disappointing reality about where that all began chapter for India and the confidence of her entitlement, alas, has been implemented particularly between 1858 and 1947, around the time of the British ruling in India. Even India's currently applicable Armed Forces Special Powers Act, as originally declared by the British rulers, was in India during 1942 under the title of Armed Forces Special Powers Ordinance, with the aim to support the central government to deal with the internal security situation that came to attention due the various district freedom movements. Then learning her historical lessons, well, even after the British withdrew from India, the government has kept the idea of the Special Powers Act, and in 1958 has granted this special powers to Indian armed forces, plus gradually adding more regions into its coverage during the years, eventually including Jammu and Kashmir in 1990, and enhancing the colonial power. Today, India's Armed Forces Special Powers Act is still being criticized by some United Nations representatives, NGOs, and humanitarians due its anti-human rights applications and for clearly serving for its colonial purpose. But some Western critics of this act, unfortunately, many years ago during the colonial exploitation of the Indian economy by the British, have also enjoyed the open trade path of India and promoted the country towards becoming one of the most commercialized business, military, logistics partner in the world. Sadly, until today, India's international multi-level partnerships with many UN members has added even further confidence to this nation's central government. Besides, the colonial bonus came with the Jammu and Kashmir region as well. After all, the area with its glaciers plus freshwater resources is one of the most important regions in the world for providing water and electricity to billions in the surrounding territories. Then the physical access to Great Silk Road keeps a massive deal of geopolitical, financial, and military importance for many countries around the world. I don't want to mention the rest. In fact, these countries are still maintaining their ideal trade plus other strategic agreements with India, despite the ongoing human rights abuses in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So the Modi government and his government's revoking the Article 370 in 5th of August 2019 and stripping the disputed territory of Kashmir from its special status is nothing more than sinister act of united colonialism. It is. Of course, we are well aware that United Nations Security Council is keep discussing this important matter, but the specific article about self-determination movement principle, which has been accepted by the United Nations, is still allowing a wider space for India towards implementing her colonialist and her upper hand upon Jammu and Kashmir, particularly with the rules of Armed Forces Special Powers Act. This cannot happen. We need to stop this now. So just to recall, according to United Nations Self-Determination Movement principle, self-determination movement's demands need to be accepted by the existing sovereign state before the international community can formally engage with them. Well said. Does it come to practice? It doesn't come well to practice. And now we can point to all these contradictions together. This is marked, and for a peaceful progress, we need to continue with our determined works and lobby to the precise government decision makers with a demand towards restructuring their Armed Forces Special Power Acts into a democratic form. So we need to lobby for restructuring this Armed Forces Special Powers Act in India. And we want this act to become more democratic, more applicable. And we need to keep reminding to the United Nations members that the partner, their partner, India, has committed to genocide and Geneva Convention, therefore still not honoring her commitments. And as the United Nations Security Council now, we need to put the international trade agreements on one side. Hence, we need to focus on the international human rights applications. We need to do this now and more than ever. In the meantime, in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir, we need to enhance the civil collaboration and solidarity applications, turning this into a peaceful neighborhood partnership movement. And we need to ensure trading our talents for talents, educational progress for educational gain, food for food, help for help. Basically, we need to barter in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. We need to barter for survival to protect our cultural values and our traditional existence. As a result, we can secure a stronger stand against the occupation forces. We can ensure to protect our traditional, cultural, folkloric values to begin with, and we can have a better chance to stand against the colonizing forces who are trying to strip our national, social, cultural, religious values from us. We should never let this go. Eventually, I would like to express my gratitude to every pioneering leader and brave individual for their extremely invaluable hard work and for standing for the rights of the vulnerable. Please keep it up. Please do. The vulnerable have no one but us. After all, determination, solidarity, and hope will be our greatest strength on the way to liberty and peace. Now we really need to focus towards the right keys and towards the right channels for the lobbying purposes. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's an honor to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shani. Now I will straight away go to Barrister Nida Salam, our young, energetic lawyer from Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Nida, you have the floor. Nadia.
First of all, I would like to say thank you to Mr. Wani and Dr. Shagufta for this invitation. It is my privilege to be here among Honorable Meritorious panel for this significant discussion. I utterly condemn all sorts of violations of human rights in occupied Kashmir under the umbrella of fascist, racist, intolerant, arrogant Modi era. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have observed a massive, brutal repression of the Kashmiri population through murders, widespread tortures, rapes, gang rapes, arbitrary arrests, detentions in the Indian states. The state of Jammu and Kashmir has highest number of interrogation and torture centers across the globe. In comparison, I'm referring to words, which demonstrates a widespread pattern of human rights and humanitarian laws violations. Besides that, moreover, 7,357 people were arrested, while 396 detainees were booked under the Draconian Public Safety Act, which keeps a person in jail for 2 years without trial. It's against human rights, commitment commitments of Universal Declaration as well. It's against that, according to Article 7, that ensures right to equality before the law, and India is in a serious breach against Article 10 of Universal Declaration, right to fair public hearing. Indian armed forces restored to vandalism and destroyed civilian properties throughout 2019. Political liberties were curtailed while before 5th August 2019. Under Article 370 and 35A, the state of Jammu and Kashmir was allowed to have its own constitution and flag. Its demographic makeup was assured by disallowing the purchase of property in the state by people from other parts of India. These special status, thus granted to the Muslim majority state by India's founding prime minister 7 decades ago, has now been revoked. Residents have been locked down in their homes with soldiers stationed on almost every street. Tens of thousands of additional Indian troops were deployed. Schools and colleges were shut down. Again, I strongly believe that India was in breach of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, especially in relation to Article 28 of Universal Declaration that states that the state parties recognize the right of the child education. Children in occupied Kashmir are in danger because children have witnessed violence for decades. India's non-compliance with the Convention on the Rights of the Child in the occupied territory of Jammu and Kashmir is simply atrocious and condemnable from all perspectives. Pellet bullets were used against minors. India is in a breach of international commitment and is responsible. Article 37 clearly states that no child shall be subjected to torture or other form of any cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. According to the United Nations reports, a very high number of children have been mercilessly tortured by the Indian military and intelligence officials at the interrogation and torture centers. Modi is responsible for that. Indian armed forces that led multiple human rights violations of the civilian population, including harassment, molestation, detentions, use of excessive, indiscriminate force. Telephone and internet services were suspended and regional political leaders were placed under house arrest. Imagine in today's time and age, like you're living without communication access. This is not 60s or 40s and 30s. This is like 21st century. Indian armed forces routinely ignore procedures safeguard when persons are taken into custody. Although Indian law requires that everyone taken into custody must be produced within 24 hours before magistrate, in fact, detainees are rarely produced at all. The Indian government has also crushed local media in Kashmir. The newspapers didn't dare to write any editorials. The lockdown in the abrogation's aftermath ensures the crumbling of the business sector, as well as halting the transport system in Kashmir. Political manifesto of abrogation of Article 35A and 370 allowed Modi to win the elections with a greater majority, amend the Indian constitution by scrapping Article 370 and on August 5, 2019. From a legal standpoint, firstly, since the right of self-determination of Kashmiris and demilitarization has been recognized by the United Nations Security Council Resolution number 3947 and 122, therefore, the current military conflict entails the application of the Geneva Convention of Armed Conflict of International Chartered. Secondly, the Indian constitutional arrangement vis-a-vis Kashmir are accepted, then it would draw the implementation of Common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention and Additional Protocol 2. Adopting the first legal perspective means that under international law, the Indian government as an occupying power violated a series of positive legal obligation to administer the occupied territory under Article 47 and 49 of the Geneva Convention. And Genocide Watch issued recently genocide alert about Indian occupied Kashmir, therefore advertising the United Nations to warn India not to commit genocide in Kashmir and Assam. 42 in relation to the BJP Discriminatory Relationship Amendment Bill 2019, stripping Muslims of Indian citizenship and dividing the families in Assam. The 5th August 2019 decision of the Modi government was the culmination of years of campaigning, preparation and propaganda unleashed by the Hindu nationalist BJP, one of the major political arms of the RSS, which is the longest running fascist movement in the world. The RSS believes in the political creed of Hindu ethno-nationalism and envision a Hindu nation of united India. Abrogation of the Article 370 has been a key concern in the ideological agenda of the far-right BJP, whose predecessors had mobilized Hindu nationalists on the slogan of "there shall not be two constituted assemblies, two prime ministers or two flags in one country. India is in a breach of United Nations Security Council resolutions." Modi and his cabinet claimed that Kashmir was back to normalcy. They justified the Kashmir siege is a temporary measure and temporary emergency measure dragged for months, while mobile phone was restored after 70 days of the lockdown. As a human being living in an autonomous atmosphere, I cannot consider act of Modi era as normalcy in any perspective. I consider violations of all international commitments and breaches by India. She is highly responsible for that. When Pakistan referred the matter to the United Nations Security Council in August-September 2019, except China, the other veto power members did not condemn Indian actions, although they asked India and Pakistan to resolve the dispute through bilateral talks. Both are nuclear powers with having sufficient capacities and capabilities to combat for national interest. In cognate to that, Western allies should play their fair and realistic part on equity. I would like to mention here that India failed to provide any evidence against Pakistan in any international court, at any international platform, to any international country. They love the blame game. Either it's a Balakot, either it's Pulwama, either it's a Pathankot. In contrast, Pakistan succeeded to prove at an international court that how she's involved in trying to destabilize through puppets like Kulbhushan Jadhav. Jammu and Kashmir police detained around about 1,500 political activists. The Modi government banned the influential social, religious voluntary organizations under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and not letting people to practice their religion. Muslims were not allowed to go to mosque for their religious practices to fulfill. India was in a breach of Article 18, freedom of religious beliefs and to practice. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International have observed a massive brutal repression by Indian military. According to the Jammu Kashmir Coalition of Civil Society report, round about almost 159 militants were brutally killed. It's against Article 3 of Universal Declaration. Everyone has a right of life to live in freedom and safety. Al Jazeera recently reported that 80 civilian, especially weak women, were killed, and India, under the umbrella of Modi, is responsible. In Kashmir, every armed force has its own interrogation centers, which include temporary detention centers with border security forces, Central Reserve Police Force, and army contingents. Detainees are at first interrogated by the detaining armed forces for a period or time which may range from several hours to several weeks. During this time, the detainees are not allowed to proceed before a court of law. It's against Article 10, right of fair trial, which clearly states that trial should be public and tried in the fair manner by impartial and independent tribunal. So I strongly believe that India is not only in a breach of international commitments, India is in a breach of universal declarations, and from what perspectives, is violated human rights. Rapes are commonly done by Indian military. Imagine, as a woman, you're like your male members, your guardians of the family, are killed by Indian military. Heavy troops are patrolling the street, and you're alone, no electricity, no medication, no communication, and you're raped by Indian military. How you will feel? No police station, no report, no international facilitation to raise your voice. So I believe that India should be prosecuted in international criminal court for the violations of human rights, for the breach of human rights, for not fulfilling international commitments. Yeah, that's it so far.
Thank you, Barrister Nadia. With this, we are reaching the conclusion of this webinar. Before I thank you all for providing me this opportunity to hear you, sparing your time to contribute to this webinar. The takeaway from this today's webinar, I think, will be that Kashmir's need to recraft a Kashmir policy based on short and long-term objectives. The short-term goal should be protection of Kashmiri Muslim identity, reversal of demographic change, and revival of political, legal, and administrative empowerment through available means. And in this connection, Kashmiri political parties must be taken on board to develop a common minimum agenda on this. And along with that, we have to create a huge network and a moment around the globe to create more awareness about this cause and unmask the India's Hindutva and fascist, what they have been claiming for over the years, that they are a democracy and all that. We have to unmask that. And for this, I would say, on the international level, while we are conducting rallies and all these things, we should have, and the people at the helm should invest more and more in the intellectual capital in order to counter the India's propaganda at international level, which they have been doing over the years to defame the Kashmiris' political struggle and always maligning Pakistan. With this, I thank you all, Senator Lee, Shani Ahmed, Ambassador Ahmed Qureshi, Nadia Salam, and Nida Salam. I always say Nadia, Nida Salam, Dr. Vikas Mobeen Shah, Tamina, Ambassador Tamina Janjua, and Claire Birville. Thank you all for being so patient for 2.25 hours. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, Wani Saab. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.